That's what I think it is.
Like many of you, I have watched The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and to my great surprise, they showcase a new version of the Super Soldier Serum Vial. Of course, since I have already made the original one, I believe I also had to build this one. As always, I have made a template to guide me through the process. But, as you probably know, it was a bit tricky because there are not a lot of references available yet. So I had to do my best with what we actually see on the show, which is not a lot. And by the way, templates can be made out of almost anything. Whether it's Inkscape, Photoshop, Krita, GIMP, well, let's face it, even a simple drawing on a napkin would do just fine. To me, this is simply a way to put my thoughts on paper and help me to better understand what I'm about to start. I began with the metallic parts. To do so, like I often do, I used aluminum. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, aluminum is super easy to use and can be handled with almost any regular tools in your shop. I use my 7x12 mini lathe for most of this build. I'm definitely no expert when it comes to machining. I have learned my limited skills simply by watching other YouTube videos, trying and failing many times. This is something I always tell my kids. If you don't try anything, for sure you'll never fail, but you'll never learn anything either. Don't be scared of trying new tools or learning new techniques. This is probably the only way you'll get better at something and eventually succeed. I always test fit everything before I go too far in the process. The reason for that is quite simple, is when you're machining something, every step you messed up brings you back to the beginning of the process. And when you're not a real machinist like me, that happened quite often. And later in this build, you will clearly see and understand what I mean by that. The lathe was the easy part. Now I had to tackle the details inside the connectors. I used marking fluid with different measuring tools to mark what I had to cut away. And although I do not own a milling machine, which I would really like to have someday, I can still manage to get what I want with my press drill, a cross vise, and a milling bit. It is not super precise, but it's good enough for my needs. The milling was mostly used for the rough cuts. After that, all the detailing was done using different files. I'm always amazed to see how much material you can take away with every single pass. Let's face it, it's less aggressive, and for me, it means less chance of messing things up. The end cap was made using roughly the same technique. There are probably 1,000 ways to make what I'm about to do, and all of them probably better than my way. But the way I pictured that in my mind was to do it in two parts. The core, and then a sleeve that goes on top of it. That sleeve was extremely useful to ease my pain, to add all the proper details on top of it. So far, I was really pleased with the result, and it already looked like something. The aluminum that I used for the core was a 1-inch diameter rod. As for the sleeve, I had to go a bit bigger, and the only size I had in hand was a 1.5 inch, meaning that I had to cut just a bit more to get what I want. Looking back at the result now, I do believe I should have shaved more metal from the sleeve. I have to admit that the end cap looked a bit too fat if you compare to the references. I was simply scared of going too thin and having the jaw chuck crushing it. Remember when I said when you mess up a step, you have to start over? Well, here it comes. Because of the vibration, the chuck fell off from the press drill and chipped the edge of the sleeve, meaning that I had to make another one. I was so pissed that I went to the tool store and I almost bought a milling machine. Maybe next time. I then did the same thing on the other side. It was now time to cut the long holes on the sides. I made a special setup using a ring sizer and my anvil just to hold it in place properly. I then used my rotary tool and a cutting disc to make the main cuts. Next, I simply cleaned the hole using a small file and a bit of elbow grease. At that point, I cleaned all the part using my polishing wheel. Polishing always helps to remove scratches and imperfections, and it does make the part look way better. The liquid container was made out of a 20mm acrylic tube that was cut to size using my knitter station. Next, I tackled the tip of the vial. You can clearly see in the references that it's made of 2 layers of clear glass. I obviously wasn't going to do that. In order to give that illusion, I turned a solid piece of acrylic on the lathe and made a cavity inside using the accurate sized drill bit. I measured the exact angle of the tip and then transferred that number to the lathe. Since I didn't have a long enough drill bit to use on the lathe for the smaller hole, I made it after with a hand drill. Was good enough. Some more polishing. I also tried to polish the inside hole using a Q-tip with paste, and surprisingly, it kinda worked. When it comes to colored liquid inside a tube, there's many ways to do it. My way? Quite simple. Food coloring mixed with water, sealed with 2 styrene sheets. The styrene sheets are glued with well done 3 plastic cement. This solvent will bound the 2 plastic together forever. I heard many people talking about the water growing bacteria over time. But technically, if it's airtight, you shouldn't have any problem. Personally, I never had any issues with my build. You could also do it with dye resin, but I like to see the bubble moving around in there. Makes it more real. From what I can see on the references, there's 2 types of paint on that thing. A dark blue and a lighter blue. So I bought these 2 metallic paint to get a cool shine out of them. A bit of tiny masking, 3 gentle coat, and it was good to go. Removing your tape when you're done is always super satisfying when it's well done. I added one final touch that is not clearly in the reference. A nice needle tip. I just thought it would look pretty cool. And then came the best part of every build, the final assembly. I know it's not super accurate, but with the reference I had and my limited skills, in the end, I believe it still came out alright.